She survived cancer. She survived public humiliation. She survived decades in one of the most brutal industries on the planet. And she did it all with that fire in her eyes, that sharp tongue, that laugh that could fill an entire room. But right now, Sharon Osbourne is not okay. And for the first time in her life, she's not hiding it. At 73 years old, the woman who has been everything to everybody, manager, mother, fighter, entertainer, is finally letting people see what's been happening behind the scenes. And what's been happening is heartbreaking in ways that most people didn't see coming. This isn't about gossip. This isn't about a celebrity having a bad week. This is about a woman who has spent her entire life being strong for everyone else, finally reaching a point where that strength has been tested in ways she never anticipated. There are things happening in Sharon's life right now that the headlines haven't fully captured. Things about her health, about her family, about the quiet, private battles she's been fighting while the rest of the world only saw the polished surface. Some of what we're about to share will shock you. Some of it will break your heart. And some of it will make you see Sharon Osbourne in a completely different way than you ever have before. This is her real story, and it starts now. To understand what Sharon is going through right now, you have to understand who Sharon Osbourne actually is. Not the TV personality, not the talent show judge, not the colorful, electric presence that dominated entertainment for decades. The real Sharon. She was born Sharon Rachel Levy in 1952 in London. And from the very beginning, her life was complicated. Her father was Don Arden, a music manager so feared in the industry that people literally called him the most feared man. In rock and roll, growing up in that environment was not gentle. It was loud, high pressure, and conditional in ways that shape a person deeply. She learned early that love often came with strings, that success required toughness, that vulnerability was a liability. So she built armor. Layer by layer, year by year, she built the kind of armor that lets you walk into any room and own it regardless of what's happening inside. She married Ozzy Osbourne in 1982, a man who was, at that point, considered unmanageable by almost everyone in the industry. She didn't just marry him. She saved his career. She structured it, rebuilt it, and turned Ozzy Osbourne into a global icon while simultaneously raising 3 children. And managing every detail of a machine that most people would have walked away from. She was extraordinary at it, but extraordinary competence in public life often comes with a private cost that nobody talks about. There were years of chaos. Ozzy's addiction struggles were not quiet or private. They were explosive, dangerous, and ongoing. Sharon fought through them. She threatened to leave. She came back. She drew lines and held them and sometimes didn't hold them and kept going anyway. Because that's what she did. She kept going. Then came 2002, a colon cancer diagnosis. Stage 3, the kind of diagnosis that stops time. She was open about it, brave about it in a way that a lot of people in her position wouldn't have been. She used it to connect, to talk, to strip away some of that armor and let people see something real. And she survived it. She has always survived, but survival is not the same as thriving. And the gap between what Sharon has survived and what she's carried in silence is larger than most people understand. Because even after the cancer, even after the very public marital crises, even after leaving and returning to television multiple times, even after all of it, there was more coming. And what has happened in the last few years, the things that have pushed Sharon Osbourne to a point of heartbreaking honesty at 73, is a story that demands to be told fully, because she deserves more than a headline. She deserves the truth being spoken clearly. There's a before and an after in Sharon Osbourne's recent story. The before was familiar, controlled. Even when things were chaotic, and they often were, Sharon was the one holding the controls. She was the architect, the manager, the person in the room who understood the full picture, while everyone else was reacting to the moment. That version of Sharon was formidable, honestly, slightly intimidating. The kind of person you did not want on your bad side and very much wanted in your corner. The after began quietly, the way most significant shifts in a person's life do, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a series of small things that add up to something undeniable. For Sharon, one of the first visible cracks came in 2021, and if you watched it happen in real time, it was genuinely difficult to process. The Talk, a daytime show she'd co-hosted for years, a platform that had been hers in a very real sense. The incident that unfolded there, a conversation about race and public statements that spiraled into a very public, very painful falling out, did not just cost her a job. It changed something. Because Sharon Osbourne had survived a lot of things professionally, controversy was not new to her. Difficult conversations were not new to her. But the particular kind of scrutiny she faced in the aftermath of that moment, the speed of it, the volume of it, the sense that the ground was shifting under her feet in ways she couldn't fully manage, hit differently. She left the talk, or was pushed out, depending on whose account you believe, likely some complicated combination of both. And for a woman who had always been the one steering the ship, suddenly finding herself off the deck entirely was disorienting in a way she didn't fully know how to process publicly. She spoke about it. She always speaks. That's Sharon's way, direct, unfiltered, sometimes to her detriment. She called it devastating. She said she felt abandoned. She used words that made it clear the wound went deeper than professional disappointment, because it wasn't just about a TV show. It was about identity, about the question that hits everyone eventually if they live long enough. Who am I when the role I've always played is taken away? That question, for Sharon, collided with everything else that was already in motion. Because while the public drama around the talk was playing out, there were private things happening. Serious things. Things that the cameras didn't capture and the interviews only hinted at. Ozzy's health had been deteriorating. Not in a vague, manageable way. In a real, alarming, life-altering way that put an entirely different kind of weight on Sharon's shoulders. The man she had built her life around, fought for, stayed with, championed through decades of chaos, was facing something that neither of them could manage or fix or will their way through. And Sharon, who had always been the solution, was face to face with a problem she couldn't solve. That collision, professional identity stripped away at the same moment, that personal life became a medical crisis, is where Sharon's story gets genuinely, deeply complicated. In January 2020, Ozzy Osbourne disclosed publicly that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, specifically a form called PRKN2, a neurodegenerative condition, the kind that doesn't reverse, the kind that requires long-term management, medical intervention, and a level of daily support that most people only understand if they've lived it or cared for someone through it. Sharon was the one who announced it, standing next to Ozzy on television, composed, controlled, because that's who she is. But composure in public is not the same as composure in private. What Sharon has quietly described, in fragments, in interviews, in moments where the armor slips just slightly, is the exhausting reality of being a caregiver for someone you love, when you're also managing your own life, your own health, your own emotional landscape. Caregiving is invisible work. It's the kind of labor that doesn't make headlines. It doesn't get applause. It happens at 3 in the morning and in doctors' offices and in the quiet moments of fear that you don't share with anyone because the person you would normally share them with is the one you're worried about. Sharon had been doing that work long before the Parkinson's diagnosis was public, because Ozzy's health challenges predated the announcement significantly. There was a serious fall in 2019, spinal surgery, pneumonia, multiple hospitalizations. Every single one of those crises required Sharon to be present, capable and strong at a time when she was also aging, also managing her own health history, also processing everything that was happening in her public life simultaneously. The human body and the human spirit both have limits, even Sharon Osbourne's. And then came an additional layer that made everything more complicated. The family decided to relocate. After decades in Los Angeles, a city that had been central to the Osbourne family identity, they moved back to the United Kingdom. Sharon was managing that transition while managing Ozzy's ongoing care, while processing the professional fallout of the previous year, while facing the quiet but persistent question of what comes next for her, personally, professionally, existentially. That's a lot for anyone. That's a lot for the strongest person in any room. And then her body started sending its own signals. Her own health, the history of cancer, the ongoing monitoring that comes with that history, the additional concerns that emerge at 73, became part of a picture that was getting heavier by the day. The woman who had always held everyone else up was quietly, privately struggling to hold herself up too. There are choices that make sense when you understand the context, and then there are choices that look alarming from the outside, even when the person dynamic between them, mother and daughter, both navigating public scrutiny around their bodies, both carrying the weight of the Osbourne family legacy, is genuinely heartbreaking when you look at it clearly. Because here are two women who love each other, who have hurt each other, who have supported each other, who are both, in their own ways, trying to figure out how to be themselves in a world that has always had very loud opinions about who they should be. The move to England was more significant than most people gave it credit for. Los Angeles had been the Osbourne family's operational base for a very long time. It was where the Osbournes was filmed, where Sharon built and ran the management empire, where the children grew up in the particular surreal reality of celebrity family life in California. Leaving that behind is not a small thing, even when you're choosing to leave, even when the reasons are clear and the decision is right. Sharon has spoken about England with a kind of relief that tells you something about how much of herself she had set aside to build the American life. There's a version of Sharon Osbourne that existed before the global celebrity, before the management empire, before the television personality, a version that is quieter, more rooted, more tied to a sense of place and identity that Hollywood never quite held. She's trying to find that version again, but home, when you return to it after decades away, is never exactly what memory preserved. The places are there, some of the people are there, but you've changed. The world has changed, and the act of return is also, always, the act of confronting how much has been lost in the time between. For Sharon, returning to England meant confronting the reality of Ozzy's condition without the busyness of an American entertainment career to absorb some of the emotional weight. She's talked about feeling lost. That word, lost, from Sharon Osbourne is significant. This is not a woman who uses words carelessly. If she says lost, she means it. And then there's the grief, the specific, complicated grief that comes from loving someone through a long illness. It's not the clean grief of loss. It's the drawn-out, anticipatory, ambiguous grief of watching someone you love change slowly. Sharon has carried that grief largely alone, because that's the role she's always played. The carrier, the holder, the person who makes it possible for everyone else to fall apart because she won't. But at 73, with everything that's accumulated, the question of how long a person can carry that weight before something gives is not hypothetical. It's urgent, and Sharon has started, carefully, imperfectly, in her own stubborn and complicated way, to finally ask for something she rarely has in her life. Help. There's a moment in a long life where the performance becomes too exhausting to sustain, where the gap between who you've been showing the world and who you actually are gets too wide to maintain without real cost. Sharon Osbourne has reached that moment. She's talked about therapy, about finally engaging with professional support in ways she didn't earlier in her life. For someone of Sharon's generation, in Sharon's world, where toughness was currency and vulnerability was weakness, that's not a small step. She's talked about her relationship with alcohol, carefully, partially, but she's talked about it, about periods in her life where drinking was a way of managing what she wasn't equipped to manage directly. She's talked about loneliness. This one hits particularly hard, because Sharon Osbourne is surrounded by people, has always been surrounded by people, and yet loneliness is not about the quantity of people around you. It's about whether anyone is truly seeing you. The fierce, fearless, take-no-prisoners Sharon was real, but so was the girl who grew up in a household where love felt conditional. So was the woman who stayed in a marriage through things that would have ended most relationships, because leaving felt more terrifying than staying. Those versions of Sharon existed simultaneously with the powerful one. They just didn't get airtime. Now, at 73, they're getting airtime. And what her children have reflected back is something genuinely moving. Kelly, Jack, and Amy, each complicated in their own ways, have spoken about their mother with a tenderness that cuts through all the noise. They see her, the real her, Sharon Osbourne built a life on being indispensable to everyone around her. What she's learning now, slowly, painfully, at 73, is that she gets to be someone people show up for too. Sharon has been open, more open than most, about cosmetic procedures, about the surgeries and interventions that have been part of her life for decades. She's spoken about facelifts, about procedures that she's later said she regretted. What's remarkable about her honesty on this subject isn't the disclosure itself. It's the emotional context underneath it. Because Sharon's relationship with her appearance is not vanity. It's armor. When your face and your body have been commented on and criticized and dissected publicly for decades, the desire to control how you present is not shallow. It's survival. She's admitted that some of the choices she made were driven by fear. Fear of aging. Fear of being dismissed. Fear that the industry she'd given her life to would simply stop seeing her as relevant when she no longer looked a certain way. That fear is real. It's gendered. It's an indictment of an industry that chews people up and discards them when they're no longer visually palatable. Sharon didn't hide from that reality. She tried to fight it on its own terms, and then, eventually, had to reckon with the cost of that fight. You can't fully understand Sharon without understanding her children either. Kelly, Jack, Amy, 3 people who grew up with cameras in their faces, parents whose lives were public property, and a family dynamic that was, to put it gently, unconventional. Sharon carried the weight of that, the guilt of a mother who wanted to give her children safety and stability, and instead gave them spectacle. Kelly's health journey, Jack's MS diagnosis, Amy's deliberate step back from the public eye from a very young age, a choice that reads like an act of self-preservation that the other children weren't able to make as cleanly. Each of those stories lives in Sharon. She feels responsible in the way that mothers feel responsible for things that are not entirely their fault, but are not entirely not their fault either. That particular kind of guilt is heavy. It doesn't lift with time. It just becomes something you carry with more or less grace depending on the day. There's a cultural story we tell about aging, especially about women aging, especially about famous women aging. The story is that it's graceful, or that it's a battle, or that it's some kind of spiritual rival at peace and wisdom. The reality is messier, and Sharon, to her credit, is telling the messy version. At 73, she is living with the accumulated weight of a life that has been genuinely extraordinary in scope and genuinely brutal in cost. The health history, the caregiving, the professional reinventions, the losses, people, roles, versions of herself. She's talked about not recognizing herself in the mirror at times, about the psychological complexity of a body that has been through cancer, through surgeries, through weight fluctuations, through decades of high-stress living. That's not celebrity drama. That's human experience at its most universal. Every person who has cared for an aging parent, or faced their own aging, or watched a version of themselves change beyond recognition, they understand what Sharon is describing. Sharon is all of us, at our most honest and most scared. And here's what's important to hold onto alongside everything difficult in this story. Sharon Osbourne is still here, still talking, still sharp, still, in the most fundamental ways, herself. The fire that made her famous has not gone out. It's different now, less aggressive, more contemplative, more aware of its own cost. But it's there. She still loves Ozzy, after everything. After all the years and crises and reinventions and heartbreak, she loves him with a ferocity that is one of the most undeniably real things about her. That love, the kind that has been tested by addiction, by illness, by decades of the hardest kind of daily reality, is not romantic fantasy. It's a choice that has been made and remade and made again thousands of times, in circumstances that would have ended lesser commitments. Sharon Osbourne has not arrived at 73 softened or defeated. She's arrived complicated, honest, tired in some ways, wiser in others, more willing to say the true thing than she perhaps has ever been. At the end of all of this, the health battles, the career upheaval, the caregiving, the grief, the honest reckoning with a life fully lived. What is Sharon Osbourne's story actually about? It's about the cost of strength, the particular price paid by people who spend their lives being the strong one, the capable one, the one who handles it so others don't have to. It's about what happens when that person finally reaches the limit of what they can carry alone. It's about the complicated, imperfect, deeply human process of learning, at any age, even 73, that asking for help is not weakness, that showing your true face is not defeat, that the people who love you can handle the real version if you let them try. Sharon Osbourne has spent a lifetime being larger than life, and in becoming smaller, more honest, more vulnerable, more willing to be seen. She's become more real than she's ever been in public. That's not a tragedy. That's growth. Painful, unwanted, hard-won growth. She deserves compassion, not the distant, performance applause kind. The real kind. The kind that says, I see what you're carrying and I